Hello folks, and welcome back to my channel. Y'all have been asking me for this one for a while, so here we go, we're finally doing it today. My cheek piercing experience. Now before we jump too fully in, I want to remind y'all that this is going to be about my personal experience with getting and healing my cheek piercings. This is not going to be like one of my one-on-one series and like an overview of cheek piercings. I actually published a blog post all about that on my website a couple months ago, and if you want to see me do something like that in video format here on YouTube, honestly I feel like I could do like an hour-long YouTube video on cheeks. So if that's something you're interested in, let me know in the comments. If not, this is going to be my personal cheek piercing experience. And not only is it going to be my personal experience, but I'm going to be real honest that this is a cautionary tale, y'all. I did not have a great experience with my cheek piercings. I did a lot of things wrong. I made a lot of mistakes. Please learn from my mistakes so that you do not repeat my errors and end up in the same situations I did. But I have wanted cheek piercings. I had wanted them probably since I was about 16, 17. There were some bloggers on Tumblr that I followed that had cheek piercings that I was like obsessed with. And at 16 and 17, I was already like relatively pierced. I was getting a piercing for like every birthday, holiday, good report card. If there was an excuse for me to be like, I want to get pierced, I was doing it. And I really, really wanted cheeks. My piercer was adamant, like, I won't do them under 18. I think they're really high risk. I don't think they're a great idea. So I will say I had a lot of information about them before I decided to do them. I knew they were a higher risk piercing. I knew they could be difficult to heal. I knew that a lot of people had like a lot of complications with them. I'd read like stories online. I think this was like around when the Ask a Professional Piercer forum started on Facebook, or shortly after it started, but I was already in that group and I'd seen people post about issues with cheek piercings, so I had some idea. But I really didn't have a detailed idea, if I'm being completely honest. I knew, like, cheek piercings are difficult to heal. Cheek piercings can have a lot of problems. Cheek piercings can be expensive. But that was the extent of my knowledge. It was pretty superficial. Even so, I loved them, I wanted them, I was very determined. At 18, I started on as an apprentice in my first studio, and I still knew that I wanted cheeks. And I think just before I turned 19, or like just after, I was like, fuck it, like, I'm gonna do it. And my mentor at the time, Johnny, didn't think it was a good idea, didn't think I should do them. He didn't have a ton of experience with doing them, so I ended up marking where I felt like I wanted them to go with him, and then piercing them myself. And honestly, for piercing them myself with absolutely not the proper education and training to do it, I really didn't do the worst job I could have. Obviously, I still have them. But I definitely didn't do a great job, and I have paid the price for that ever since. My right one is in a really good placement. It's at a really good angle. We nailed this one. 10 out of 10. Good job, baby Lynn. My left one, really good placement. Not great angle. Not great angle. Definitely a little bit downward kicked on the outside, and that'll come into play later. But I pierced them myself in my first apprenticeship. They were pierced with 14 gauge, externally threaded barbells, not good quality jewelry. I did put in really long bars. I did put in what I thought were really long bars, and whew. I woke up the very first morning, and I want to say I put in like 5/8 bars, which I thought was going to be long enough, and I woke up the next morning and I was like, oh shit. They were already embedding, they already didn't have enough room. I remember waking my stepdad up and having him drive me over to the studio at like 6 in the morning so that I could go put like 1.25 inch long barbells in them, like industrial bars basically, because they were so swollen. And that was kind of my first sign that, like, oh wow, like, they were not kidding. Cheeks are no joke. They were so incredibly swollen. So swapped them to longer bars. That was better. That was way better. And then we began the fun process of healing them. And I'm going to be honest, like, so as far as getting them, I really didn't think they were that painful to get done. Obviously, like, I did them on myself. But overall, like, also as a professional, my feedback from clients is that they're typically, like, not really that bad to get pierced. Most folks who are getting cheeks have a bunch of other piercings, and cheeks usually rank pretty low on that scale. And the first few days of healing, aside from being just enormously swollen, weren't really that bad. Like, eating was very awkward. And drinking was very awkward. The bars obviously were, like, super long once I'd lengthened them, which is really what you need for cheeks because they can have so much swelling. So you're awkwardly having to, like, eat and chew and work around the barbells, and it's just not great. You know, you do catch them on your teeth, you do catch them on your gums, you really are aware of the feeling of the discs on the inside on your teeth or gums. That drove me crazy for the first few weeks, just being able to, like, feel the discs against my teeth. I was really not used to it. It was a very, like, jarring sensory experience. But after the first, I would say, like, 2 weeks for me, the swelling started to go down, and I was able to downsize them. I want to say, I think my first downsize, we went down to 7/8 because I was still pretty swollen. And that downsize, like, the heavens opened and, like, a chorus of angels came down and started singing. Immediately, first downsize, I remember how good they felt because I could eat, I could talk, I could drink normally again. They weren't, like, getting caught on my teeth and gums as much. I was immediately less aware of them on my teeth and gums. 10 out of 10. Great. And that downsize experience kind of set the tone for every other downsize I ever end up doing with my cheeks, which is I'll notice, typically while I'm eating, that I'm really aware of the inside of the jewelry on my cheek piercings, and that's usually my first little, like, sign that they were ready to go shorter. And then from there I'd notice them, like, sticking out more on the front and having more movement, and, you know, once they had enough length, I'd downsize them, and they'd feel really, really good and really, really comfortable again. And I say this same thing to my clients too when I do cheeks. I'm like, just write it out to that first downsize because things are going to be way easier once you get them downsized. So first downsize rolls along. We're doing good. We're smooth sailing. Probably about a month in, I started to deal with irritation bumps. And they started off pretty tame. They looked like irritation bumps like you would see on most other piercings, like denser, more solid rings around the piercing with some discoloration. And I knew that cheeks were going to be hard to heal, so I kind of anticipated dealing with irritation. But probably around month 3 or 4, that, like, run-of-the-mill irritation really quickly became drainage irritation. And it became these larger lumps that would drain out with fluid and secretion that were underneath the skin of my cheeks. And it was pretty scary because I'd read online about the risks with cheeks abscessing, and of course that's what I was immediately worried it was. And this time of, like, my cheeks being about 3-4 months old and me having these issues was also part of the time when I was learning that my first apprenticeship was not great and that I hadn't been using good quality jewelry, that I hadn't been taught properly. This was when I was starting to reach out to other better piercers, and this was when I learned that the jewelry I was wearing was not good quality, and that was probably also contributing, but also that I really, 14 gauge was too thin for cheeks. Because it allowed for what we call, like, almost a cheese wire irritation. So when we think about how we cut cheese, we use a wire that just, like, slides right through cheese, and it's thin enough that with that movement it just cuts right through it. That can happen with piercings in our body too. We call it that cheese wire effect. And when we use jewelry that is too thin in certain placements, especially high movement placements, especially thick fatty tissue areas, all of that movement, the jewelry literally just, like, right through the tissue right through the skin. So cheeks are really more stable at like a 12 or a 10 gauge. And when they're done smaller, they can deal with a lot of drainage issues and a lot of irritations. They can also deal with abscesses and with migration and just a lot of issues. So I was very fortunate. I caught that super early. It was like 3 months in, and I remember like panic driving around to shops in Philly and getting 12 gauge barbells and beads and discs and stretching my cheeks up to a 12 gauge. And knock on wood, they recovered pretty well from that. They obviously swelled up a ton from me stretching them. They were very new cheek piercings. They were not happy with it. But once I stretched them and got those 12s in, they stayed irritated for a couple more months, and then they kind of like settled down, and I could just tell probably like 2 or 3 weeks after I'd put the 12s in that they felt better, that they felt more stable. I remember, because I think I was still in college, or like I was on my way before, like this was just before I like quit college to fully pursue piercing, and I vividly remember like being in class and talking and feeling those barbells like catch in the piercing channel the wrong way, and for the longest time I thought I was feeling like crust being pulled into the piercing, but no matter how well I cleaned them or how well I kept them clean, I would still get that feeling sometimes. And basically right away after stretching to a 12 and them settling down, that feeling went away completely. And on certain words and expressions, I still felt the movement, but without that twinge of pain. And I realized that I had been feeling that like the 14 gauge bars were too thin, and they were literally like putting pressure on the piercings while I was talking and like causing really serious issues. Now, I got really lucky. A lot of times when they're pierced too thin, you can also deal with leakage, which is when saliva literally just leaks out of your cheek piercing 24/7. A lot of times that also happens when they're pierced too far back, which I did know about. So mine are a little bit more far forward. I think that is part of what saved me, but I've definitely seen clients with well-placed further forward cheeks that are too thin end up dealing with leakage. So super grateful that was not a problem I encountered. Super grateful I stretched them to a stable size early enough to like dodge that bullet completely. Leakage problems with cheeks are usually like they're doomed. I've very rarely seen people deal with leakage and be able to recover from it. So we didn't deal with that. So we're doing okay. So now I have 12 gauge in my cheeks. I have quality jewelry. We're doing okay. We're getting them to settle. And they approach the year mark, and they're doing all right. They're not great. They still get crusty, like basically every single day, morning and night. I have to clean them. There's a bunch of crust. There's a bunch of secretion. They still get tender on and off. This was also around the time frame where I realized that I was probably never going to be able to go back to like doing makeup the way I ever had, because they were a year in, and if I even got like a hint of product near them, especially the left one, instantly swollen, irritated, problematic, grumpy, just not having a good time. And at this point, I've like left my first studio. I'm like getting into quality piercing. I was doing performance work for Suspension. We occasionally did shows where we had to wear like makeup and face paint, and my cheeks were not having it. But they weren't like, I didn't have those big fluid-filled irritation bumps anymore. So like, I would take this weird like in-between place. And that would be the story of my cheek piercings for probably like the next 3 to 4 years. Crusty, just so crusty. A lot of like moist secretions from time to time that would sometimes cause like red, irritated skin under the jewelry. I really fought with them like randomly becoming swollen and irritated and needing to be upsized, and then calming down and being too long and getting caught on my teeth and gums, and then having to downsize. During this time period, my right cheek piercing, which is my golden child, that one, if you recall, I said is pierced really well. formed a little nest pocket, stayed off my teeth, great, amazing, wonderful. My left cheek piercing, which is really, it's not like an egregiously terrible angle. Like if this is where it should be, it's like this. It's just the most marginally kicked upwards. But this one became my problem child. I could not get the inside of it to nest to save my life. I would deal with it like kind of starting to nest and then like overnight turning into embedding, and I would need to put a longer bar in. I remember one day vividly where like we couldn't figure out like what had been going on, and most of the piercers I were working with at the time, along with myself, were like, you've had it for like 2-3 years, the angle isn't that off that I think we should pull it and re-pierce it, like let's just basically throw everything at the wall and see what sticks. I remember a day where I had to drive around like 3 or 4 different quality studios in the Philadelphia area for like, I don't know, like 4 hours. I spent like 4 hours driving around to these different studios, just trying to find somewhere that had like the exact right length bar for my current level of swelling and a like giant 6mm opal cabochon end for the inside to like put some compression on the tissue there. During this time period, I probably spent easily $400 to $500 on just barbells, discs, beads, M&M ends, and like trying to get my cheeks to calm down. I would like swell up and need something longer, but everything I currently owned was like really long, and then it would get caught on my teeth and I would bite it and that would cause its own issues, so I'd have to go in and get like a bar that was like just a few millimeters longer, and then the swelling would go down, but the bars that I had were all shorter than what would fit, but the long one was beginning to cause problems, so I would have to go in and get like an in-between length, and then sometimes like it was starting to nest, but the edges of the nest pocket were having a lot of pain. It's like the edge of the disc was too sharp, so we tried an M&M end, but then I was struggling with embedding, so we tried a bigger bead, and then that wasn't comfortable on my teeth, so we tried literally an opal end. Like I was having to spend a lot of money in this like back and forth song and dance, trying to keep my cheek piercings happy, and basically always trying to make sure I didn't end up with those fluid-filled irritations again. Because at this point, again, we're 3 years in, I could tell when that type of irritation would be starting to happen. And if I didn't get the right jewelry, the right backing, the right fit in quickly when the piercing was irritated, I would begin to feel like a pressure sensation in my cheek and a swelling that was like the first warning sign that if I didn't take care of it soon, I was going to end up with one of those fluid pockets again, and I didn't want to deal with that. And my cheeks have always been super sensitive, so things like really spicy food would trigger it. When I would be traveling and on the road doing suspension work and not like keeping my face clean or keeping up with cleaning my piercings, that would do it. It would happen sometimes from climate change. When I was traveling, if I was in like the desert and my skin was really dry, they'd get irritated. I'd feel something happen. Like wintertime, really cold out, runny nose, dry skin, they would get irritated. The wrong food, the wrong toothpaste, makeup, anywhere in or near them. This was around the time when I realized I was giving up on wearing foundation. I'd worn foundation through high school, and I ended up overall viewing this as a positive because I no longer feel like I have to have like a full beat, like a full face on to feel like pretty or beautiful or even just like willing to leave my house. But there was I was not going to be able to wear foundation with how pissed off my cheeks would get, especially my left one. I do remember the day that I threw out all my foundation. Sad, but happy moments. But it was a lot. It was a lot. It was a big investment into time, into money, into dealing with constantly troubleshooting these piercings that were having problems on and off. And a lot of this could have been resolved if I had pierced them at the proper size originally, and if I'd seen a better piercer instead of doing them myself, and if my left one was at a good angle. But if we're being honest, like the right one is quite literally at a perfect angle, and it still has these issues from time to time too. The left one absolutely flares up more flares up worse. I can tell that the angle on that one causes more issues, but even with the right one being perfect, I still have these problems with the right one from time to time. So even with perfect cheek piercings, like, this is still just some people's reality. And another thing to remember, you know, as we all know, I have psoriasis, I have autoimmune conditions, my body handles piercings worse. It's really no surprise that for me, cheek piercings were a struggle. So we get to around the 4 or 5 year mark, and they settled for a while. They were doing good. Once or twice a year, I'd have a flare up, usually the left one, and it'd get really swollen and pissy, and I'd put in like a comically long bar, and it'd calm down, and I'd re-downsize it, and we'd be good to go. We'd be fine. And then, while I was living in Florida, probably 8 years, 7, 8, 9 years into having my cheeks, probably what everyone with cheek piercings dreads the most happened to me, and I got an abscess. And it actually isn't my left cheek piercing, which is the bad one and the crooked one that got it. It is my right one. And I just remember waking up in the morning and my mentor at the time, like, looking at my face and being like, oh, I think we need to take you to a hospital. And for reference, this was my mentor. I've talked about my experience with that apprenticeship before, who under no circumstances was like, would give people time off, would let people take leave. Like, I went to work sick, I went to work with a cold, you know, I went to work with a sprained ankle, I went to work days after, like, a literally life-threatening infection. You always go to work, but he looked at my face and he was like, you need a doctor, you need a hospital. My face, seemingly overnight, had just, the whole cheek had blown up. And I could feel this intense pressure down from my cheek piercing and radiating along my jawline. And very fortunately, I was still on my parents' insurance at the time, and I had been seeing a local dentist for help, and she was able to get me in very quickly, and I went in right away, and she was like, that is 100% an abscess. And it seemingly had come out of nowhere. I had been fine the day before. I went to work my night shift job. It had been irritated and grumpy at work, but I just assumed that I'd like rubbed my face too hard, or like hit something at work, and then I woke up the next morning and my face had blown up. They did end up having to cut into my face and drain the abscess and pack it full of packing gauze, which is super gross. And we had to replace that packing gauze every few days. And what it turns out had happened was a poppy seed from a bagel that I ate had probably managed to get into the piercing channel and then managed to get down into the tissue of my cheek and cause an abscess. And it could have been, we worked across the street from a bagel store, so I ate a lot of bagels. So it could have been, that could have gotten into my face days, weeks, months ago, and then finally my body was like, absolutely not. And the full cost, thank God I was on my parents' insurance, so a lot of it was covered. I did have to pay a lot of it out of pocket, but if I hadn't been on insurance, it would have been $15,000 for that treatment. As it was, I ended up having to pay a few thousand. Not great, not a fun experience. I still have scarring from the abscess on this side. I actually, when I'm working with other piercers on doing cheek piercings, I will let people all the time. It's super weird to get a bunch of piercers together in a room. We get weird, and I'm always telling people like, oh, like, feel inside my mouth, feel for where I had my abscess, and everyone's like, oh wow, like I feel crazy, but you can feel this path down my jaw and back where the abscess was. And it was rough, and it wasn't, the thing that gets me is it wasn't even like it was the one that's pierced at a bad angle. It wasn't even like I did something wrong. I didn't like coat these in makeup for days or anything. I just ate food. I ate a bagel, and this could really happen to anyone eating any type of food. Technically, this is a risk with any oral piercing, but cheeks, given the nature of where they're placed, food can get stuck there more easily and have a harder time getting out, and abscessing is more high risk. But it's scary, and I want to talk about it because I had it happen from a happenstance piece of food, but where I see true abscesses that need surgery the most often with cheeks is when they're pierced incorrectly. When they're pierced with jewelry that's too thin, that's low quality, that causes those fluid irritations to form, and clients are stubborn and they don't want to retire their cheeks, and they don't want to spend for the expensive quality jewelry, and they don't want to stretch them. Those fluid pockets become abscesses so fast. And then, for me, I got to keep my cheek piercings because the seed got in there and went down. Like, the abscess, crazy enough, if you feel, actually doesn't really fully connect to the cheek piercing. It starts like 5 or 6 millimeters down, where that seed must have just like burrowed into the fat of my cheek. But I see people all the time who have those drainage bumps, who don't really do enough to fix them soon enough, and it does turn into a full-blown abscess. Then they lose the cheek piercing on top of everything, and the abscess has to be drained right over where the cheek piercing sat, and now there's so much scarring they can't really get them redone. And also, it's expensive, it's uncomfortable, like, no one wants to have to deal with that. I can promise you, from living through it myself, a bad time. Bad time. That happened, that was not great. I healed up from the abscess, and the pain of having to pay the very expensive dental bills stuck around a lot longer than the pain of actually having the abscess. But we were good. We were in the clear. And my cheeks stayed, basically the same from there. I did, like a year later, have some pretty big weight loss. This was pretty unhealthy weight loss. I was in the throes of an eating disorder at the time, but my cheeks flared up really badly because the size of them changed a lot. I lost like 60, 70 pounds, and my whole face shape changed. And the bars that I had been wearing comfortably for like the last couple of years were no longer the right size. I had to go through that whole like upsize, downsize, song and dance, different backing size, song and dance. Thankfully at this point, I owned most of what I would need. I think I bought like 2 or 3 new bars or backings, but instead of having to buy like dozens, I already owned dozens, so I was able to just troubleshoot them out of my kit. But still frustrating to every couple of days have to change the jewelry in my cheeks, deal with them being sore, deal with them being tender. Since that big like weight change, they've been like pretty stable, pretty steady. Now when I say stable and steady, it might not be what you expect, because this is not like, a healed ear piercing where unless you mess with it, it is fine 100% of the time and you don't have to remember it's there. Or like your nostril piercings or even your lip piercings. I would say on average, probably about 3 to 4 times a year, my cheek piercings do flare up and have problems. It's almost always my left one. A lot of times it's if I'm sick, if I get like a cold or the flu, or my allergies are really bad, it'll flare up. If I wear too much makeup or get too much product in it. These days I can toe the line. Sometimes I'll do like a big heavy blush or something, and I'll get stuff in it and they'll be fine. And then I think I'll get a little too cocky. I'll do that a little too often until one time I do it and it's not. Same thing with spicy food. I love eating spicy food. It's fine 98% of the time. 2% of the time it's not. It flares up. And my cheek will get super crusty, super goopy. There'll be a ton of stuff to clean off. I'll take care of it for a few days. Usually, at this point, I know my body well enough where I can, like, the slightest change in my cheeks, I know, I can anticipate it, and I know, okay, this calls for a hot compress, this calls for a cold compress, this calls for a longer bar, this calls for a bead on the inside, this calls for a disc on the inside. I know my body pretty well, so most of the time, it's just a little grumpy, and I, immediately change things around and change up my routine, and it calms down, and it's fine. A few times a year, though, it just decides to throw a full hissy fit, and I have to put in a super long bar. My cheek gets really swollen, it gets really leaky. Sometimes the start of one of those fluid pockets begins to form, and I have to do a ton of babying and a ton of work. And then it calms down and I downsize it and we're fine. It's still something I deal with a few times a year. And that doesn't even begin to count the amount of times that it starts to happen and I successfully prevent it. And I really wish, and my hope is in by making this video and telling this story, I do get to do this, but I really wish I could go back in time to baby Lynn, who, like I said, understood cheeks would be hard to heal, knew they could be expensive, and knew they could have problems, and sit them down and be like, that is barely the tip of the iceberg. Like, you are signing up for something that multiple times a year is going to cause you pain, discomfort, irritation. It's going to be frustrating. You're going to have to sit there and change jewelry. It's going to look gross. And then many more times a year than that, you're going to have to try and prevent it from getting that bad. And do different things with jewelry and do different things with care. And I love my cheek piercings. They're amongst my favorite piercings on my face. They make me feel the most like myself. They make me feel the most me. But there are definitely times, like when I'm trying to have a nice weekend down at the beach with my friends, but my cheek piercing has decided that the ocean sand is going to piss it off, where I'm like, do I should just take this piercing out. Like, is this even worth it? Do I even want to deal with this? Like, this is so frustrating. And I'm going to be dealing with this, you know, for the rest of my life, for the rest of the time I have these piercings. I wouldn't quite say I regret it, but man, I wish I had done more research. I wish I had talked to more people who had cheek piercings. I wish I'd done them the right way. I had a 12 or a 10 gauge with good quality jewelry and good angles right from the start. But again, even with all of those things, you know, my right one is great and still flares up from time to time. Like, it's a really, really big commitment, and I just don't think at like 18, 19 when I decided to get them, even with as many piercings as I had at that point in my life, that I truly was prepared for what it was going to be like, you know, over a decade later, to still be actively cleaning a piercing, actively taking care of a piercing, like actively having to worry about a piercing like it's still healing in most situations. Now, all of that being said, I love my cheek piercings. Like, people are always like, oh, what's your favorite piercing? And for me, it's really my stretched ears, but right after that, coming in at a very close second place, are my cheeks. I look in the mirror and they make me feel the most me. They make my face feel like my face. I think they're super adorable. I love the way they look when I smile. They've made me so much more confident and comfortable in my smile. I love the jewelry for them. Like, aesthetic-wise, like 500 out of 10. I'm obsessed with my cheek piercings. They really do give me so much happiness and so much joy. So if I had to, I would do it all over again. Like, if something happened and I had to take these out, you better believe the first thing on my to-do list would be getting them redone. Like, I am not me without my cheek piercings. I feel so strongly attached to them. And it doesn't mean that I don't still have the regrets of not going about getting them the best way I could and not doing more research and having a better understanding of what I was signing up for. And I think I would still get them knowing everything I deal with them. 18-year-old Lynn never could have fathomed having to spend a few $1,000s on an abscess. Like, logically, I knew abscesses could happen, but in my brain I was like, oh, but it's not going to happen to me. Like, I'm just going to take really good care of it, and so I'm going to avoid it. Like, spoiler alert, you can take really good care of it. That doesn't necessarily mean you're guaranteed to avoid these problems with cheeks. Like, in getting cheeks, even with great care and a great piercer, you're still signing up for this risk. Now, another thing that I really want to mention, because, you know, this is about my cheek piercing experience, and I really want to be honest about my full experience, is that socially, cheeks are a very divisive piercing to get. And when I got mine, I already had some pretty visible tattoos. I already had a ton of piercings. I had my high nostrils before I had my cheeks. I had my bridge. I was stretching my ears. I had a bunch of ear piercings. I'm pretty sure I had the subdermal implants on my collarbones before I had my cheeks. So I had a lot of work done. I was pretty modified. But, woo, very few piercings and tattoos and modifications I've gotten have been as universally disliked as my cheek piercing. And this has always been something that has been hard for me to grapple with, and something that I really wished I saw talked about more, because, you know, someone else's opinion on your body and your body modifications really should not be the deciding factor in you getting modifications or not. But man, I was really not prepared for how strongly people would react to cheek piercings and how much people wouldn't like them. When I was getting ready to get them, I had a lot of people in my life, men and women, people I'd been involved with and not, literally beg me not to get them because they thought they were so ugly. And as I've lived with them, I have had many interactions on dating apps and on first dates, and also just out in public with friends and meeting new people, where people have said to my face, I think you're very attractive, but I think those cheek piercings are so ugly, I could never, like, be with you while you had them. Or, like, you would need to take them out for me to want to date you or be in a relationship with you. And, again, I don't think that other people's opinions of your body and your body modifications should dictate what you decide to get done. Like, I think you should do what makes you happiest in your body. And as I just said, like, my cheeks are, like, my second favorite piercing. Like, I really love them. I really connect to them. If I had to, like, get rid of most of my piercings and only keep a handful, you better bet cheeks would make that cut. But especially when I was younger and I was not as secure and confident in myself, I was really not prepared for how much people weren't going to like my cheek piercings and how much that would affect people who I was interested in being in a relationship with or hooking up with, or even just people who I was interested in being friends with, who were like, dude, I, like, fucking hate those things on your face. Like, you're a cool person, but, like, I really don't like those piercings. And likewise, that same level of dislike for these piercings comes across in other circumstances. I've been denied entry to bars and restaurants. Usually it's because of my hand tattoo, but I have had people say that my cheek piercings are, like, too much. Like, that's what pushes the line. Even in my line of work as a piercer, I have had parents and clients come in and be very uncomfortable because I have cheek piercings, and I've literally had clients ask the staff for someone who didn't have these piercings to be the person who works on them. Out of all of the just piercings that I have, my cheeks are probably the most divisive, that people have the strongest opinion about, and it's usually a negative one. And back when I got them done, I would have bet money that it would have been my stretched ears that had people feeling that way. I would have bet money it would have been all my surface piercing work that had people feeling that way. I would have bet it would have been my very visible implants on my chest that had people feeling that way. Or my visible tattoos. No. It has been the cheek piercings. And, again, I don't regret getting them. I love them. They make me feel super confident. But, wow, I wish someone had talked to me about how socially controversial they would be and how many doors they would close for me. And if you really want these and you really love them and you really like the look of them, like, again, and you're prepared for the healing, do it. Go for it. I love mine. Zero regrets. Even though I've had this, like, tumultuous relationship with them and this harder time with healing and having them and having to spend so much money and time and effort with them, like, I still love them. And I also still know a lot of my problems could have been avoided by being smarter in how I got them pierced. But definitely go into them prepared for the way people are going to feel about them, and kind of have, like, a shield over your heart, because very soft, squishy, like, 18, 19-year-old Lynn definitely went home and cried a lot because of how many people just hated my cheek piercings. Overall, that's been my experience with cheeks. It was not the easiest road. It was not the easiest road. But it also wasn't the worst. You know, I avoided really like super severe like drainage irritation and leakage irritation. I avoided the straight up leaking. My cheeks are pretty symmetrical. The angles are pretty good. I've had no oral damage, shockingly enough. Again, knock on wood. I had that abscess, but I've never chipped a tooth. I've had no damage to my gums. My teeth are fully healthy. Go little 18-year-old Lynn. I really took the time to place these very thoughtfully for my bite line and for my teeth and gums, all things considered. Once they were downsized, I never really caught them on my teeth, so no long-term oral health problems, you know, aside from the scarring from that abscess, which, you know, could have happened with or without cheek piercings, but cheek piercings did make it easier. Everything's been really good. Like, they flare up often. It's kind of a pain in the ass. I get really frustrated, but I deal with it. I am someone with autoimmune conditions and skin conditions. I have a lot of factors working against me when it comes to having piercings like this, and so the fact that I've had them for over a decade now, and I do have no issues with my teeth and gums, and no, like, major oral health concerns, aside from that one abscess, is honestly, like, pretty great. I will take it. Like, I love them. You know, I don't regret a thing. If I could go back in time and maybe have had, like, Luis Garcia do them for me, that's maybe the only thing that I would change. But realistically, I know full well, even if I had the best piercer or the best circumstances to get them, I still could have risked the same things I experience now. So it's kind of what you sign up for when you sign up for these piercings, is the risk of these things happening. Overall, I love them. I don't regret them a bit. Again, I think they are such a huge part of what makes my face my face. I love my cheek piercings. I think they're so cute. I think they're some of my favorite piercings I have. I just adore them. And yeah, I know many of you have been asking me to come on here and share like my cheek piercing experience and my journey with them. So I wanted to do that. If you want to see me do a version of my blog post that's just an in-depth dive on like anatomy and placement and jewelry for people who want to get their cheeks done, let me know in the comments down below. If you have any other questions about my experience and my journey, let me know that too. And yeah, that's my cheek piercing story. Thanks for hanging out and sitting down and chatting with me about this. And, you know, all of your support means the world to me, so if you like this video, if you like my content, please hit like and subscribe. And I'm sure we will sit down and hang out again soon. Have a great rest of your day. Bye.